Hello and welcome to Alden Carrow's Poetry Podcast. I'm Alden Carrow, poet, walker and author of Cornwall in Verse, Tides Tour in Poetry, which is available at Amazon. This is a podcast for people who suspect, as I do, that the world is moving too quickly and that something quietly extraordinary waits for anyone willing to slow down, listen closely, and pay proper attention to it. In every episode, I share two poems. The first is a guest poem from the wider world of verse, something that has stayed with me or troubled me or refused to let me go. The second is one of my own, drawn from the moors, the coasts, the weather, and the strange beauty of ordinary days. And for your chance to win a signed copy of Cornwall in Verse, Tides Tour in Poetry, I invite you to suggest a future guest poem by emailing me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. The next guest poem will come from one of you. Today, we are exploring an idea that has been sitting with me for some time and that has only sharpened. I have walked the Cornish coast. Some places are not weathered. They are practised. There is a real distinction here, and it is the spine of this episode. A thing that has been merely beaten down by the wind is one thing, the cliff worn back, the stone cracked, the harbour wall slowly giving up. But a thing that has learned to stand within the weather is another thing entirely. A coastline that has been doing this for 10,000 years is not simply old, it is skilled. We are going to sit with that idea this week, beginning at the edge of the sea itself with Lord Byron, who in Childe Harold's pilgrimage watches civilizations rise and fall against an ocean that has noticed none of them, and then crossing, in the second half, to the small North Cornish town of Bude, where the sea pool is carved in stone and tide, the surface dance on the morning swell, and a community of 3,000 souls has made an art of leaning into the gale. So pour something warm, settle in. The wind is up, the light is going, and there is poetry to be found. To begin our journey, we travel south to a stretch of the Italian coast where in the autumn of 1817 a young English poet sat at a writing desk overlooking the Adriatic, recovering from one of the most spectacular public scandals in literary history, and addressed the sea. His name was George Gordon Byron, the 6th Baron Byron, and at 30 he was already the most famous poet in Europe. 3 years earlier he had separated from his wife under circumstances so lurid that London society had effectively expelled him. He had left England in April 1816, never to return. He had spent a summer at the Villa Diodati on Lake Geneva in the company of Percy and Mary Shelley, where Mary had written the first chapters of Frankenstein, and Byron had begun the third canto of Childe Harold's pilgrimage. By the time he reached Venice, he was working on the fourth and final canto, a long, restless meditation on ruin, beauty, exile, and the sea. The 7 stanzas you are about to hear stand at the very end of that poem, and they are, by common consent, the greatest sea poetry the Romantic movement produced. Byron's relationship with the natural world was not Wordsworth's. Wordsworth went to nature for healing, for moral instruction, for the spots of time that bind us to our better selves. Byron went to nature to feel small. The Apostrophe to the ocean is not a poem of communion. It is a poem of confrontation. Byron stands at the edge of the Adriatic and acknowledges, with something close to relief, that the sea does not care about him, does not care about his scandals, does not care about the empires that have risen and fallen along its shores. Assyria, Greece, Rome, Carthage, all gone. The ocean is unchanged. Man marks the earth with ruin, Byron writes. His control stops with the shore. That single line, more than perhaps any other in English romantic verse, is the philosophical fulcrum of the genre's relationship with the sea. I have chosen the apostrophe because it is, in its grand and tempest-tossed way, the great romantic statement of the theme we are exploring this episode. Some places are not weathered, we have been saying, they are practised. And Byron's ocean is the supreme example. It's been doing this for 10,000 years, and 10,000 more before that, and it has watched the human story unfold against it without flinching, without changing, and without ever quite being mastered. There is a thrill in the poem, a wild, almost mocking joy at the futility of human pretension when set against something genuinely indifferent and genuinely vast. Byron, who had been broken by London and was on the run from a continent, found in the sea a force that could not be broken in turn, and he wrote it with the freedom of a man who has decided to stop pretending he is in charge of anything. A note before we listen. The full Childe Harold's Pilgrimage runs to 4 cantos and several hundred Spenserian stanzas. The apostrophe to the ocean is the closing movement of Canto 4, 7 stanzas, sometimes anthologized as a standalone poem, sometimes printed within the longer work. I'm going to read it as a standalone piece it is effectively become, beginning with the famous "There is a pleasure in the pathless woods," and ending where Byron lays his hand upon the ocean's mane and lets the poem dissolve into surf. There is a pleasure in the pathless woods, there is a rapture on the lonely shore, there is society where none intrudes, by the deep sea and music in its roar. I love not man the less, but nature more. From these our interviews, in which I steal, from all I may be, or have been before, to mingle with the universe and feel what I can never express, yet cannot all conceal. Roll on, thou deep and dark blue ocean, roll. 10,000 fleets sweep over thee in vain. Man marks the earth with ruin, his control stops with the shore. Upon the watery plain, the wrecks are all thy deed, nor doth remain a shadow of man's ravage save his own, when for a moment, like a drop of rain, he sinks into thy depths with bubbling groan, without a grave, unknelled, uncoffined, and unknown. His steps are not upon thy paths, thy fields are not a spoil for him. Thou dost arise, and shake him from thee, the vile strength he wields for earth's destruction, thou dost all despise, spurning him from thy bosom to the skies, and sendest him, shivering in thy playful spray, and howling to his gods, where haply lies his petty hope in some near port or bay, and dashest him again to earth, there let him lay. The armaments which thunderstrike the walls of rock-built cities, bidding nations quake, and monarchs tremble in their capitals. The oak leviathans, whose huge ribs make their clay creator the vain title take of Lord of thee and arbiter of war. These are thy toys, and, as the snowy flake, they melt into thy yeast of waves, which mar alike the Armada's pride or spoils of Trafalgar. Thy shores are empire, changed in all save thee. Assyria, Greece, Rome, Carthage, what are they? Thy waters wash them power, while they were free, and many a tyrant since. Their shores obey the stranger, slave or savage, their decay has dried up realms to deserts. Not so thou, unchangeable save to thy wild waves' play. Time writes no wrinkle on thine azure brow, such as creation's dawn beheld, thou rollest now. Thou glorious mirror, where the Almighty's form glasses itself in tempests, in all time, calm or convulsed in breeze or gale or storm, icing the pole or in the torrid clime, dark heaving, boundless, endless and sublime, the image of eternity, the throne of the invisible. Even from out thy slime, the monsters of the deep are made, each zone obeys thee, thou goest forth, dread, fathomless, alone. And I have loved thee, ocean, and my joy of youthful sports was on thy breast, to be borne like thy bubbles, onward. From a boy I wantoned with thy breakers, they to me were a delight, and if the freshening sea made them a terror, 'twas a pleasing fear, for I was at it where a child of thee, and trusted to thy billows far and near, and laid my hand upon thy mane as I do here. When I read Byron, I'm struck by the sheer scale of his vision. He describes the ocean as the one place where man's control stops. Think about that for a moment. In our modern world, we feel we have mapped every inch, conquered every peak, and digitized every valley. But the sea remains a pathless entity. It refuses to be weathered by us. Instead, it is the ocean that does the weathering. Byron's language, unkennelled, uncoffined, and unknown, reminds us of the absolute indifference of nature. It is a humbling thought, especially for those of us who live on the edges of this island. We see the watery plain, and we realise that our vile strength is nothing compared to the playful spray of a storm. This poem sets the stage for our theme because it shows us the raw material of the world. It shows us what we are up against. If the ocean is this vast, unyielding force, then the places we build on its edge must be more than just wood and stone. They must be practised. They must be places where the people have learned the music in its roar and found a way to turn that roar into a conversation. Moving from the grand sweeping vistas of Byron's romanticism, I want to bring us closer to the ground, to a place that embodies, more than anywhere I know, this idea of being practised. My own heart is rooted in North Yorkshire, in the small towns and quiet valleys where I do most of my walking and most of my writing. But for the last few years I have been drawn again and again to a stretch of the English coast that shares North Yorkshire's rugged, honest character, but on entirely different terms. The North Cornish coast is one of the wildest in the British Isles. The Atlantic comes in here with nothing in its way, having travelled 3,000 miles of open ocean to do so, and the coastline that meets it has had to learn things that calmer waters have not required. Bude sits on that coastline, halfway between Hartland Point and Tintagel, on the very northern edge of Cornwall. It is a small town, a few thousand souls in the town proper, built around a tidal estuary, a Victorian sea-lock canal, and a stretch of beach called Summerlees that is famous for two things: its sea pool, which is carved directly into the rock and has been filled by every high tide for more than 100 years, and its surf, which draws boards and wetsuits from as far away as Devon and South Wales. The town has rebuilt itself many times. It has been a smuggling port, a Victorian resort, a near derelict backwater in the mid-20th century, and is now, against most predictions, thriving again, sustained partly by tourism, partly by surfing, and partly by a stubborn local refusal to be anywhere else. It is a town, as I said in the introduction, which feels as though it has reached an agreement with the Atlantic. Not a peace treaty. The sea has not stopped throwing itself at the cliffs, but an arrangement, a working accommodation, the kind of long, careful relationship that two parties enter into when neither of them is going anywhere. I wrote this poem after a morning spent on Summerlees in early autumn, when the surf was high and the air had that particular North Cornish quality of being half salt and half light. The sea pool was full of swimmers. The surfers were lining up beyond the breakers. Gulls were doing their looping commentary overhead, and I had the strong sense, watching all of it, that this was a community that had practised something the rest of England had forgotten how to do. They had practised standing at the edge. They had practised joy at the edge. They had practised the kind of resilience that does not look like resilience because it looks, instead, like a Saturday morning with a flask of coffee and a board under your arm. The poem that came out of that morning is, I think, the most outwardly cheerful piece I have brought to this podcast in some time. After Bedel's contented hush, Bodmin's haunted granite, and Bryher's chosen solitude, Bude is the brighter corner of the Cornish argument, the town that does not merely endure its weather, but seems, on the right day, to enjoy it. I wanted the poem to carry that brightness without losing the seriousness underneath, because the joy of a place like Bude is not naive, it is earned. Every breaker that crashes on Summerlees is the same Atlantic that has tested every other community on this coastline, and most of those communities are smaller, quieter, or just gone. Bude is still here, and it is laughing, and the laughter is the practice. So here is the poem, Bude. The breakers crash on Summerlees, so laughter carried on the breeze, a sea pool carved in stone and tide, where morning swims and myths collide. The cliffs stand bold with rust and green, a canvas brushed by what has been. Each footstep on the coastal track feels time retreats, then turning back. The surfers dance on crests and foam, their fleeting arcs a kind of home, while gulls cry out in looping flight, and sunsets burn the edge of night. In Bude the sea writes every line, of joy, of loss, of weathered spine, a town that leans into the gale, and finds its strength in every tale. When I wrote this, I was thinking about Summerlees Beach and that remarkable sea pool. If you've never seen it, it's a semi-natural pool built into the rocks, topped up twice a day by the tide. It's the perfect metaphor for what I mean by practised. It isn't a struggle against the sea, it is a way of inviting the sea in on our own terms. The salt laughter I mention is that specific sound you only hear at the coast, the sound of people who are invigorated by the cold, who aren't afraid of a bit of grit. The line, a town that leans into the gale, is the core of the poem. To lean into something is an active choice. A dead tree is weathered until it falls. A living person leans into the wind to keep their balance. That is the weathered spine, the resilience that comes from standing your ground year after year, until the standing itself becomes a form of art. In Bude, as in many of our coastal villages in Yorkshire, the geography dictates the character. You can't be arrogant in a place where the sunset burns the edge of night, and the cliffs stand bold with rust. You have to be part of the landscape, not a master of it. This leads us into our main discussion for today, the poetry of community. What is it that small coastal towns actually do that our great cities have forgotten? I often think that cities are designed to minimise the environment. In a city, you can spend an entire day without knowing which way the wind is blowing, or whether the tide is coming in or going out. The city is a masterpiece of insulation. But in a small coastal town, the environment is the primary neighbour. Because of this, the community has to be practised. In a city, you can be anonymous. You can walk past 1,000 people and never speak. But in a place like Bude or Staithes or Robin Hood's Bay, being anonymous is a luxury the environment doesn't allow. When a storm comes in, it doesn't just hit one house, it hits the whole front. This shared vulnerability creates a practised social cohesion. What cities have forgotten is the rhythm of shared survival. In a small town, you know who has the tractor. You know who knows how to fix a roof, and who needs a check-in when the swell gets too high. This isn't just neighbourliness, it's a form of folk poetry. It's a series of unwritten verses that hold the town together. We've forgotten how to be weathered together. In a city, we experience problems as individual inconveniences. In a coastal town, problems are collective events. The sea pool in Bude is a great example of this. It was built by the community for the community to provide a safe place to swim when the Atlantic was too fierce. It requires maintenance. It requires people to care for it. It is a practice space. Modern urban life often prioritises convenience over practice. We want things to work without us having to understand them or even participate in them. But there is no poetry in convenience. Poetry lives in the friction. It lives in the effort of keeping a community alive against the rust and green of time. I also think about the visibility of the individual. In a small town, your weathered spine is visible to everyone. People know your story, your tales, as I put it in the poem. This creates an accountability that cities lack. In a city, you can fail and disappear. In a small town, you are held by the community. You are part of the canvas brushed by what has been. This creates a sense of belonging that is deeply poetic because it is rooted in time and continuity. We are not just passing through, we are adding our footstep to the coastal track that has been walked for centuries. Cities are often built on the new, the next skyscraper, the next development. Coastal towns are built on the enduring. They don't try to outshine the sunset, they just try to be there to see it. There's a profound wisdom in that. What if we took that coastal mindset back into our urban spaces? What if we stopped trying to control the watery plane of our lives, as Byron noted was impossible, and started leaning into the gale together? Small towns teach us that resilience isn't about being untouchable. It's about being touchable, being vulnerable to the elements and to each other, and finding strength in that shared state. They remind us that we are not separate from nature, but a fleeting arc within it, like the surfers in the foam. Our lives are short, but the music in the roar is eternal. By practicing community, we harmonise with that roar instead of trying to drown it out. And so we come to the end of another walk together. We have stood at the edge of the sea with Lord Byron, watching empire and civilization break against an ocean that has noticed none of them, and we have walked the Summerlee sands at Bude, where the surfers dance on the morning swell, and a small town leans into the gale and finds its strength in every tale. Two coastlines, 2 centuries apart, making the same quiet argument, that some places are not weathered, they are practised. What looks like an endurance from the outside is in fact a skill, a thing the coast has learned by standing at the edge for 10,000 years, and a thing we ourselves might yet learn with patience in our own weather. So now I would love to hear from you. If there is a poem you would like featured in a future episode, a classic, something modern, or a personal favourite you have carried with you for years, please email me at aldencarrow78@gmail.com. That's aldencarrow78@gmail.com. Every suggestion is entered into the draw for a signed copy of Cornwall in Verse, Tied to Touring Poetry, which will be sent to you by hand. The next guest poem will come from one of you, and that is precisely how I want this podcast to work, not as a voice raised above the storm, but as the kind of steady exchange that only happens between people who have learned to keep their footing. So thank you for listening, for slowing down with me, and for being willing to treat your own resilience as a practice rather than a hope. Until next time, may you find poetry waiting for you in the everyday, and I shall speak to you again on Wednesday.